Today, I have with me Maurice Frank, who walked his first Camino. He did the Camino Frances for the first time in September, October of 23 at the age of 67. And then last summer, he walked the Camino Portuguese, and he took the spiritual variant of that route, which we're going to talk about, and then continued on and walked to what people way back when thought was the end of the world, Finisterre, which is another option for walking once you get to Santiago. And then he volunteered in Santiago de Compostela. So we're going to ask him about his time spent doing that. And he has done another long distance walk in England, and he's headed back to the Camino de Santiago in the spring to actually walk the Camino Frances again. And so we'll get into why he's necessarily walking a route that he has already walked before. So first of all, welcome, Maurice, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm thrilled to be here with you and your audience.
Wonderful. So I first want to know, how did you hear about the Camino?
In 2005, I read the novel The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho, Brazilian writer. Fascinating novel. It just didn't sink in that this was a real place and something you could do. It just seemed very mythical. Fast forward many years during COVID lockdown, somehow it came to my attention and I began looking into it extensively and was drawn to it almost immediately because of the sense of community that seemed to embody the Camino, and that was what pulled me in.
Gotcha. So so you had this interest to do it, but it took a while for you to get from I really want to do this to actually being on the trail. So tell us about that process. Because some people literally hear about it and are on the trail within a week, which is also amazing. But it took you a few years. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of happened over those few years? So I know it was during COVID, so I'm guessing that was
Hmm.
the first challenge.
Yeah, I had to wait until travel was safe and much of the Camino was closed.
Mhm.
I don't remember when it started reopening. And then it was just a matter of just embracing the idea and thinking this is something I could do. I'd never done anything like it, had not even backpacked, though I've been a hiker for 30 years,
Okay.
but day hikes, 5 miles, 8 miles,
Hmm.
nothing like the Camino Frances, 500 miles, 5 weeks.
Hmm.
So there was a mental absorption process I had to go through. And then the planning actually began. I talked to my wife, Wendy, right after New Year's 2023, and I said, I would like to do this. And she said, okay. And then it was a matter of talking about, when to go. Think we had some other travel planned earlier in the year. So
Hmm.
the fall was my opening. And then I just started, the research, lots of research. I over researched things. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
and it
it
happened.
and it is very easy to do, to over research. I have said before, and I'll say again, when I did my first Camino in 2012, no one I knew had ever heard of it, let alone walked it. And it is much different now. My father, who's in his late 70s, most of his friends had never heard of it. He's only been doing it in recent years. Um, but yeah, the amount of information out there has exploded, and it can be overwhelming at times, which is one of the reasons I do what I do, because I like to help people kind of cut through all of that and focus on their Camino and what they're looking for. Because I remember all the rabbit holes I went down on my first Camino when there wasn't a lot of information out there, worrying about things that I didn't even need to worry about, because I read about them on the internet. I was like, oh, maybe I should worry about that. So yeah, it is very easy to over research. That being said, you had done all this research, but what are some things that surprised you about being on your first Camino?
As much as I'd heard about the Camino family phenomenon and I wanted that, I did find it. One thing that surprised me was that that's not the only way people relate to each other.
Mhm,
And after a while, what I realized was I had three kinds of connections. I did have Camino families,
mhm,
not just one. They don't always begin at the beginning and last until the end. I
mhm,
had different families at different times with different people. But I also had Camino friends, meaning people who I knew by name. We had had coffees, we'd had meals, we walked together. We just weren't staying together. We weren't, it's a subtle difference. We weren't family.
mm,
And then there was another cloud of what I called familiar faces.
mm,
People that I would see, they would see me, we'd recognize each other, we, nod when Camino, but we weren't really at the point where, we were having conversations.
mhm, mhm.
And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and for those that don't know this concept of Camino family, can you explain that a little bit more?
If you have seen the movie The Way, the four characters are the quintessential Camino family. They met very early in the Camino. They walked together, they stayed in the same places, they had meals together. More importantly, they shared their stories and they shared their transformations along the way, their struggles, their achievements, and things like that. So it's
Mhm,
a special bond that forms when people are having this unique experience away from home, all doing the same thing, going in the same direction, not always for the same reasons. That can be very personal,
mhm.
but it's a natural bonding environment.
It is for sure because I tell people, like, where else in life, can you talk to someone pretty much uninterrupted for multiple hours with maybe the only interruption being like, "Hey, do you wanna stop here for coffee or keep walking?" It's really quite an incredible thing to experience, and I like how you talked about kind of those 3 groups of people, because I also noticed some of those familiar faces would come in to become friends or family depending on different, situations. Did you find that some people kind of moved groups at some point?
Yes, that did happen to me. And, after a while, I got to the point where I felt every time I said hello to someone, it could be a matter of hours before we were close friends. Um, and, it helped me realize to treat everybody like they were really special because they could become special to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that, Maurice. Thank you for putting it that way. I You had your first experience walking the Camino de Santiago from Saint Jean Pied de Port, which is over 500 miles. So, first of all, congratulations on that. That is any Camino is a huge accomplishment, but 500 miles is certainly nothing to sneeze at. But at what point did you know, hey, I want to do this again?
Um, it's going to sound crazy, but it was around day 5. It just took hold of me really quickly. And I was intellectually aware that I was still at the beginning. I may have been in a kind of honeymoon experience phase, but I just had a feeling like I like this. I could do this again.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember mine was within my first week as well on my first Camino. I wasn't as conscious of it, but I did find myself thinking, "Oh, well, next time I come, I'll stay there instead of this place." And I started marking things in my guidebook that I, would do differently or places I really liked and so yeah, I totally get that. I've also heard from other people who they get to Santiago and they're like, "Oh man, I'm so glad this is done. It's been amazing, but whoa." And then it takes a little bit for it to kick in and it starts to kind of pull at them again. So it's interesting. I've only in my talk with probably thousands of pilgrims at this point, I've only ever met one person who said, "Yeah, I was done and I was never going back." Everyone else I've talked to either at least was interested in doing another one or could appreciate people wanting to do another one, if not having gone themselves to do kind of another Camino experience. For your second one, you chose to do the Camino Portuguese, specifically starting in Porto. And for those watching that don't know, the Camino is not just one route, it is a network of pilgrimage trails across Spain, France, Portugal. People would walk out their doors in Italy, in Germany, in Switzerland, and walk to Santiago de Compostela since the 800s. And so there is not just one place to start, there is not just one route. And so I didn't even know that when I did my first Camino. And so some people, when they decide they want to do another Camino, start looking at other routes. And so, Maurice, for your second Camino, when you decided, hey, I want to do this again, what made you choose to start in Porto the second time and do the Camino Portuguese?
I chose the Portuguese because I wanted another Camino experience that was in a different place. I knew there were multiple routes.
Hmm.
I knew the Portuguese was second most popular, so there
Hmm.
would be people, but it was not as crowded as the Francaise. Although when I was there, I wouldn't say it was crowded. There was just people around all the
Hmm.
time. Um, I chose starting from Porto because I had read the facilities were better between Porto and Santiago compared to starting in Lisbon.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I had about 30 days.
Hmm.
I wanted to also walk to Finisterre and Machia, which I ran out of time my first Camino to go there. And then when I looked at my schedule, I realized, and we'll talk about this, I have some days I might be able to spend in Santiago again.
Hmm. And we'll talk about what you did with
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
Porto to Santiago, I believe my walk was about 11 days.
Hmm.
Some people do 12 to 14. It depends on
Hmm.
what you like to do if you take
Hmm.
rest days.
Hmm. And specifically for the Camino Portuguese, there's something called the spiritual variant. And for those that don't know, there are plenty of variants along the various Camino routes. Some of them have more variants than others. Some people study this ahead of time and plan accordingly. Some people just show up and, talk to whatever pilgrim's coming up behind them and say, hey, do you know what this is about? Which one are you doing? So tell us, but the spiritual variant is one that I have heard of but have not yet walked. I've walked from Porto to Santiago, but I have not yet done the spiritual variant. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is and why you chose to do it?
Um, so it's a detour off of what's considered the main route. Now, on the Portuguese from Porto, I'll back up a step. You actually have three paths you can follow. The original is called the Central Route.
Mm.
There is a coastal route, which is partly on the coast and also inland, and a relatively newer variant called the Senda Littoral, which hugs the coast of the Douro River much more.
Mhm.
All of them converge at some point, and the spiritual variant is a detour approximately 3 kilometers from a city called Pontevedra.
Mhm.
And it it has two really special features. One is what's called the Transladio. It's a boat ride on the river, and it simulates the final transfer of the remains of St. James
Mhm.
into Spain, and they landed in the Padron area of the city of Padron.
Mhm.
So the boat ride brings you just a few kilometers to Padron.
Mhm.
Before that, there is a spectacular section called the Route of Stone and Water, and it's a 7 mile path along a river where there are the remains of several old stone mills for grinding grain.
Okay.
The mills are along a river. There are some waterfalls, there are stone bridges, there are stone walls, and it's all within a lush, peaceful forest. It is like a magical place and
Oh,
well worth the detour.
okay. Okay, wonderful. And the spiritual variant, can you tell us, is it called the spiritual variant because of Padron specifically, or do you know a little bit about why it's called that?
I believe it's to get you closer to the final path of St. James remains to Spain. I'm
Mhm.
not a historian. I'm a little
That's
hazy here,
okay. No
but
problem.
that's what I've read.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
and about 3 kilometers after Pontevedra, you're walking on a sidewalk on a road, and you get to an intersection where you can only go right or left. The yellow arrows in the main route go to the right. If you look to the left, there's a little bulletin board somewhat hidden by shrubbery about the spiritual variant. And then if you cross the road, you start seeing a different kind of route marker, and
Okay.
that lets you know you're on the path.
Okay.
It does have a little bit of uphill, um, doable, not really very
Mhm.
difficult.
Mhm.
It's slightly longer, about 10 kilometers longer in total distance.
Mhm.
Um, and the boat ride, by the way, you you still qualify for a Compostela if you are on the boat ride, which is about 30 kilometers that you're not actually walking.
Yes. And back in the Middle Ages, people would arrive to Camino de Santiago, or the sorry, Santiago de Compostela, by all kinds of methods. For example, the group that I'm leading in a couple weeks, we're going to walk the Camino Inglés, and it's called that because people would arrive from England and other countries. And would land in Ferrol or A Coruña and then walk to Santiago. And I've seen entire books dedicated to the maritime routes of the Camino de Santiago. And there's a great movie about a group of men who, over the course of a couple years, actually build a boat and sail it. They're not sailing it; they're rowing it along the coast, and eventually then walk with the boat into Santiago de Compostela. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but I will look it up and put it in the notes for this episode. So there are a variety of ways to get to and to arrive in Santiago de Compostela, and it's pretty cool that there are options like that that still exist from way back when. Uh, the You're going to head out next spring on your third Camino, but you've chosen to do the Frances again, the Camino Frances. Now, this is a question a lot of people that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of people I know who do multiple Caminos. They just love that experience and wanna have it again and again, and so they understand wanting to do another Camino. However, this idea of doing the same route that you've already done, I'm curious about that because I've done that, and a lot of people have asked me, "Wait a minute, why would you go back and do a route that you already did?" So that's my question for you, Maurice. Why are you going back and doing the Francaise again?
Very early in my time on the Francaise, I started feeling like it was such a rich environment with so much to see and experience. I could only dip into a little of it. So I felt in some ways incomplete.
Mhm,
So I would like to go back um, and have more, be in some places I may have just, walked right through.
mhm,
Another reason is that the first time I was a new pilgrim and figuring out a lot of it, and now I've had more experience on Caminos, and my approach, I think, will be a little bit different.
mhm,
I think my awareness will be sharper in some ways that
mhm,
I know what I'm doing. I can focus less on the mechanics of how do I get from here to there? Where am I
mhm,
going to stay tonight? I need
mhm.
a coffee. um,
Yeah, a lot of those foundational questions are answered already. You know those.
yeah, and be in the place. Um,
Yeah.
I also know, and this is a well-known phrase, that I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago.
Mhm.
The Camino has changed. Some places I stayed and loved, I was sad to hear have closed.
Mhm.
So it can never be the same Camino twice.
Yeah.
And related to that, last year when after my Portuguese walk and I had a rest day in Santiago, I walked to Finisterre and
Yeah.
then to Mexia, and I decided I had enough time to walk back to Santiago, which I did.
Mm. Mhm.
And I was at dinner one night and speaking with a pilgrim from France, and I told him of my plan, and he said, "Oh, but walking back, you'll see the same route. What's the point of that?" And I said, "No, no, no. If you are a hiker, you know, even on an out and back hike, you see a completely different trail."
Mhm.
And on
Yeah.
the way back, there were many sites and places I had overlooked the first time that I appreciated the second.
Yeah. Thank you for that perspective. That is exactly my sentiment. You're not the same person. The Camino has certainly changed. And for me, when I've gone back and done routes, again, sometimes I've gone back with someone, so it's a different experience because my first Camino and about half of the Caminos I've done have been on my own. The other half have been with other people. So that makes it different as well. The people you meet obviously are gonna be different. So there's just so many, um, aspects to that. I'm gonna go back now to for those that don't know, and thank you again for those of you that have joined us. I'm here with Maurice Frank, who, has walked a couple Caminos already, and we're talking about his experiences, and he's going to go back in the spring. But one of the other things that he's done that I would like to hear more about from him is that after your second Camino, you spent some time volunteering in Santiago de Compostela. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that experience came about, first of all?
Yes, I volunteered at a welcome center called Pilgrim House.
Hmm.
And before my first Camino, I had heard about that on some of the Camino podcasts,
Hmm.
which had interviewed the two founders, Nate and Faith.
Hmm.
So I knew about it. And after my first Camino, I had planned extra days in Santiago, which I highly recommend. It helps the transition.
Yeah.
So I went to Pilgrim House. And I experienced it. And it's basically a center for pilgrims. It is not an albergue or a place to stay.
Hmm.
There is in the front. It's the community area, couches. You could sit there, interact with other people. In the rear is another room that's a quiet area. You can sit there by yourself, which I did. You can read journals. They have a library you can read. And every afternoon, they have a group discussion for pilgrims who are want to reflect more on their Camino.
Hmm. Hmm.
They also offer by the staff and volunteers there an individual discussion if you want, and I took advantage of that.
Hmm.
And in addition to those really important services, they do some practical things like Um, you can leave your backpack there if you're out in Santiago during the day, safe place to store it.
Hmm.
You can print boarding passes or other documents you might need for your travels.
Hmm.
They can give you recommendations for restaurants or places to stay. You can just get a coffee there. They do laundry, which can
Hmm.
be at the end of your Camino. That can be very helpful.
Hmm.
Um, and while the staff is bilingual English and Spanish, Pilgrim House is primarily for English speaking pilgrims.
Hmm. Okay.
So after I was there, at the end of my first Camino, when I
Hmm.
was looking at my schedule for my second Camino and estimating how long the Portuguese would take and the Finisterre Machia walk would take, I realized I had roughly a week I could play with.
Mhm.
So I wrote to Pilgrim House and I said, I'd like to volunteer. I only have about a week. Is that enough? Because I had heard, to be a hospitalero, typically it's a minimum 2 weeks
Mhm.
commitment.
Mhm.
And they said, sure, that works. And I filled out some forms to tell them about who I was. They do want volunteers to have walked a Camino. And then, they said, okay. I told them the days I had available, and they said,
Mhm.
we've got you scheduled. And so they told me to come in one day early for training, which only took about 3 hours. And it was on one of the days that they are closed. Pilgrim
Mhm.
House is open 5 days a week, except Sunday and Wednesday.
Mhm.
So I was able to get trained on a Wednesday. And then the next day, I began what was 4 days of volunteering.
Mhm.
And as a volunteer, I would greet pilgrims as they entered,
Mhm.
just ask them how they were, what could we do for them, what did they need. I'd tell them what we had to offer.
Mhm.
Some of them just were curious and wanted, to print something or,
Mhm.
a restaurant recommendation. Others would want to sit and have a conversation.
Mhm.
And that was the best part.
Mhm.
And it turned out when I was there in August, it was not a peak season.
Mhm.
So we didn't have more pilgrims than we could pay full attention to. And
Mhm.
that worked out very well also.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's awesome. I have been to Pilgrim House multiple times. It didn't exist during my first Camino, but I'm not sure exactly when they started. But they do have a wonderful service for pilgrims, honestly. The quiet room in the back, I very much appreciated because when you get to Santiago, it can be overwhelming for a lot of pilgrims. It was for me. I wasn't expecting some great epiphany. As my friend Lois says, you can't plan an epiphany. But the amount of people, because Santiago is a very popular tourist town as well. Tour buses, tour groups, etc., and all of the Camino pilgrims that are there as well. And I actually just I think I wrote a post about this the other day about some of the actually, no, it was a Q&A that I did, a couple weeks ago in this very series where I talked about some of the quiet places in Santiago, and Pilgrim House is one that I mentioned because that room in the back is lovely. They have all those books there. They also have some resources for reflection, so they have different folders, and you can pull out some reflection questions. And I participated in the reflection groups, and it is just a wonderful way because, it's I think a lot of people do a lot of research about their Camino ahead of time, and what shoes to have and, where to stay and, the route, choosing a route. They learn a lot about what happens on the trail, but I think there's a lack of information. We're getting more now, but I think there's a lack of information on what it's like post Camino.
Hmm.
And it does take some adjustment for a lot of people, and it's nice that Pilgrim House is there to kind of facilitate, that adjustment, to start that process with you. So thank you for that, and thank you for doing that volunteer work. And there are sites out there. There are, in addition, for those that are interested in volunteering on the Camino, there are many places you can volunteer. You can volunteer in some of the hostels. You can volunteer in the Pilgrim Office in Santiago de Compostela. You can volunteer in the Pilgrim Office in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, which I've done a few times. So there are a lot of wonderful opportunities to volunteer on the Camino, and usually, just like you said, Maurice, they want you to have done it so that you know what the experience is like. So yeah, I would highly recommend that for people that are interested in something like that. For those of you that have joined us live here, if you have any questions for Maurice about anything that we're talking about or any other questions Camino related, feel free to type those into the chat, and we'd be happy to answer them. So Maurice, looking back on this whole process from when you first started thinking about the Camino to when you started doing your research, and then even when you were saying, over researching, what if someone's considering the Camino, what are some things that what advice would you give, or what are some things you wish you'd known ahead of time?
That's a great question. I'm a planner and a researcher, and like I said, I did a lot of that. Surprisingly, once I was on the ground, a lot of that seemed to melt away, and I was just trying to be there and live the experience.
Mhm,
Now, I
mhm,
think a lot of that information, it helped me feel more confident and more prepared,
mhm.
but I didn't necessarily have to live by it when I was actually walking.
Yeah.
So I would say if you like to approach something like this that way, definitely go ahead, but hold it lightly and let go when you feel like you can. And the Camino will often surprise you. You cannot really plan everything about it.
Mhm,
There will be surprises, and it's much healthier, I think, to just welcome them and know that things work out. It surprised me over and over whenever something looked like it was a problem, it actually turned out to be something better than what would have happened otherwise.
mhm. Can you give us do you have any stories that come to mind about a situation where that happened?
Well, one of them was I had been part of a small Camino family with two American women that I originally met in Orison my very first night. And then later we got together starting at a dinner in Pamplona, and we walked together for almost 2 weeks. I had started having some blister problems. I was slowing down. They had to move ahead. And, one night we agreed they would go ahead. And at first I felt a sense of loss,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
and it was difficult. And then two things happened that I could not have anticipated. One, I had time to myself and I began enjoying the solitude. Particularly, I was in the Meseta area then, the middle of
Mhm,
the Camino, which for many people and for me is the more introspective part.
mhm,
So that was really a gift. And the second thing that happened was at the coffee stops and lunch stops and in the albergues, I started meeting many more people
mhm,
that I might not have met had I been within my little family group.
mhm, mhm.
So at first, it felt like a bad experience, and it didn't take long before I realized it was a gift.
Yeah, yeah. And how often that happens. You're exactly right. It's reminding me of a similar experience I had where, it was only like maybe my it was within my first week, it might have been within the first few days, and I stepped out of bed and I couldn't even put weight on one of my feet. The back of my heel was in so much pain, and I knew something was wrong. And one of, the things that same thing, I had met this group of people, we'd only been together for a few days, but you felt so close to them, and I thought, "Man, this is really I'm really sad about this because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to walk at all today, let alone stick with these folks." And I remember that by the time, I'd hobbled around a little bit, I have a background in physical therapy, so I knew it was a stretching kind of issue, um and so, I started working it out a little bit, and I was one of the last 2 people to leave, the place I was staying. The other guy was one of this group of people that I had known, and when I got outside of our accommodation, there was a small group of people, some of whom I had met before, some of whom I hadn't, that were just kinda hanging out there discussing what to do, and they all decided to go eat breakfast first before starting their walk, and I just felt so lucky, like, I get to spend a little bit more time with these people, and I shared what was happening with my leg. The French guy gave me some sort of natural spray to spray on my ankle. Um, I took some Advil or something, and I was kind of warming myself up, walking around the cafe, and by the time we were all done with breakfast, I could do it. I knew I'd be able to walk, maybe not as fast as everyone, but that did give me that, "Okay, this isn't the end of the world, I'll be okay." And eventually everybody went ahead of me, and then one of the guys turned around at some point, and he was walking towards me, and I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "Oh, I left my walking stick in the bar where we stopped for breakfast." And so I was like, "Oh my god," it just kept coming that I kept seeing these people even though I thought they were gone. Um, and sure enough, there was a day, it was probably a couple weeks later, I walked into O Sombrero, and it was like coming home week, and it they have this scene in the movie The Way as well, and it happened just like that for me. I walked into this place, and it seemed like everyone that I had met was there. People that I thought were days ahead of me. Either they'd taken a rest day in a big city or they got injured, so they slowed down. I mean, it was just amazing to hear all of the things that happened that conspired without anything I could have done to have us all be there in that moment, in that place. I'm just getting chills right now talking about that, but it's very Camino-esque to have these incredible experiences, and also note that when they got ahead of me, just like you, I eventually, you know, I got to be myself a bit again, and I met some other folks, and, one of the things that I did wanna bring up, though, this reminds me about, meeting people, especially if you're doing the Camino alone. It's not, there's plenty of people out there doing it, so it's not usually hard to meet people. However, I wanna kind of caution people or ask about, I know sometimes people will say, "I didn't walk my own Camino," because they ended up staying with this group, and they would start the morning with them and stop with them every place, and then, stay in the same place as them every night. Did you find that you were doing that, and that was a pattern that was good to get out of, or did you kind of just keep running into your Camino family or these people that you knew?
I did have that same exact experience when I was with the two women I spent the most time with
Mhm,
before they went ahead of me. I did start to feel like it wasn't under my control anymore.
mhm.
You know, we would make a group decision. Which town are we heading for? Where are we going to stay? Where are we going to eat?
Mhm,
And once that I was on my own, I did have a very different experience.
mhm.
Now, I did eventually have another Camino family, short but very deeply intense with two other folks.
Mhm.
And then, fortunately, at the very end, magically, organically, the last 5 days, I came together with four other people,
Mhm.
my last family, and we walked into Santiago together.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to walk in myself because what drew me to the Camino, as
Yeah.
I said in the beginning, was the community.
Mhm.
And it just
Mhm.
seemed like if I'm here for community, I shouldn't be finishing on my own. And
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's individual for every person. And you can have what's been interesting to me lately is as I'm doing some of these shorter Camino routes. So you did the Camino Frances, which takes over 30 days. You mentioned the Camino Portuguese. That can take up to 2 weeks from Porto, 10 days to 2 weeks. But even when you do some of these shorter routes, for example, I just came back from doing the Camino Inglés over just 6 days from Ferrol to Santiago de Compostela. And I was amazed at the experiences that you can have even just within that short period of time. And that same thing of, on my first morning, I met these two young guys from Barcelona, originally from Argentina, and they were delightful. But when I asked them about their plans for the Camino, they were going to be ahead of me. And then eventually they were going to slow down so that we might end up seeing each other again. But I was like, oh man, it'd be really nice to run into these guys again. And it wasn't until I, again, walked into a bar. And for those of you that are new to the Camino, a bar is where you get coffee, where you get breakfast, where you get lunch. We're not all sitting there drinking alcohol per se. Um, But I walked in this bar and I saw these 2 guys and one of them, they smiled, they lit right up, and I walked in and I was like, "Where do I know these guys from?" And it was them, and we just had a wonderful time, and along with them and some other folks that I had met, we ended up walking into Santiago de Compostela together. By that same token, I totally one of the things I love about the Camino is all these ways that you can do it, and some people do want that solitary experience, and for me, my last day, I realized I did not want to start with anyone. I wanted to start my last day on my own. And so I actually started ahead of a lot of the people that I knew and realized eventually we'd probably catch up. And that's exactly what happened. But for those of you either listening live or watching this later, recognize too, like Maurice and I have been sharing, there's so many different ways to do the Camino, and don't necessarily go by just what one or two people say or what people are saying online. Um, do it the way that works for you. So Maurice, I want to thank you for joining me. Anything else you'd like to add or recommend for people who are considering the Camino?
If you're considering the Camino, just do it. You will regret not doing it much more than you would ever regret walking a Camino. It's an experience you cannot have any other way.
Thank you so much. That is just a perfect way to end this interview. And again, I'm here with Maurice Frank, who did his first Camino in 2023 at the age of 67, and like so many of us, got hooked and has been back since, and is going back again in the spring. Has also volunteered on the Camino, walked out to Finisterre, which is after you get to Santiago, you can keep going to the ocean. And I am just delighted to have had this chance to talk with you, Marie. So thank you so much. And for those of you that are watching, I do this every Wednesday. I bring on people who have done the Camino or are somehow associated with the Camino de Santiago. So I invite you to join us here live every Wednesday at 11 Eastern Time, or you can always watch the recordings. Thank you again so much, Maurice.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate the invite to be with you.
All right. Have a good day. We'll see you in Buen Camino.
Buen Camino.